which has 3 units. Okay, and which will deal with the poetry from the Elizabethan age to the age of enlightenment, or you can even take it as Pope Alexander Pope's age, and it goes on till 18th century, starting from 16th to 18th, and the poets have been covered here are Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, and then John Milton, and then you have John Donne. Then you also have Andrew Marvell. Okay, so let us start. Right. So let me just share the screen here. Right. So here we go. First and foremost, let us quickly take a look at the poetic idiom in the initial stages of the mainstream British literature. And let us understand the dominant philosophy of the Elizabethan period. And why? Because this is what we are going to talk about, the poetry of this period. So we will just quickly look into the features of Elizabethan poetry in general, and then move on to the sonnets which were prevalent during that period. So to start with, Elizabethan poetry, I mean, that is the period in which we get to see these forms of poetry called the sonnets. So now the first unit, which talks about William Shakespeare as a poet and John Milton. So before we begin to read the biography as well as his poetry and their poetry, we will also look into the Elizabethan poetry, okay, the period Elizabethan and the features of the poetry during that period, okay. I hope I'm very clear. Can somebody text me in the chat box whether I'm clear or not, so that I can, sometimes there's a technical glitch. Am I audible? Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Sadia Sharfi, thank you so much. Right, so here we go. Uh, Now, poetry is a subgenre of literature. We all know the different genres of literature, right? Poetry, prose, and you have this under prose, you might have fiction, non-fiction, and so on, right? So it witnessed the upsurge in literary production, which took place during Renaissance. Poetry in particular had a great progression in terms of form and theme. The most predominant poetic type was lyrical poetry, which was at first literally represented in a form of sonnet. Sonnet is an icon for the Elizabethan poetry, as the majority of writers adopted and adapted this newly borrowed style of poetry. I think we did discuss about sonnet yesterday, so I'll be doing it now also. So a sonnet is a 14-line poem written in iambic pentameter, and it is originated in Italy. So here iambic pentameter is like, you have a kind of a beat in a poetry. So here iamb is nothing but it's a meter, it's a measure of pentameter. Penta is 5. So you will have 5 pairs of beats in a line. So when you actually read it, so it can be iambic tetrameter, iambic trimeter, the tri, tetra, all it denotes the number of beats in that particular line. So mostly the sonnet had iambic pentameter, where it had 5 pairs of beats, like, one stressed, unstressed, one stressed, unstressed. Like, you have 5 pairs of beats in a and it is called as iambic pentameter, and it is originated in Italy. Now, Italian sonnet, more commonly known as Petrarchan sonnet, was originally invented by an Italian poet named Petrarch. The Petrarchan sonnet is divided into two parts, stanzas, octave, and sestet. So this is like, I'm just giving you a kind of a, look into this Elizabethan period's poetry. Right. Then, well, what is an octave of a sonnet? And so why am I talking about sonnet? Because that was the form of poetry which we could see, and that was quite, popular. Most of the poets have taken up this form of poetry. So that's why we are looking into this sonnet. So octave, what does it mean? It's an 8-line stanza consisting the first part of the Petrarchan sonnet, and where this argument is introduced. That is the part of the poem where argument is introduced. The sestet is 6-line stanza consisting the second part of the Petrarchan sonnet. So the first part is octave, second part is sestet, and where the argument is falling down till reaching the final resolution. So they're going to resolve at the end of the sestet. And then between octave and sestet, a volta or turn occurs to mark a shift in the ongoing argument. So as the argument proceeds, then, suddenly there is a turn, a twist. And then the concluding sestet tries to resolve. That kind of a twist comes between these two. Okay, and that's called as volta, right? In fact, Thomas Wyatt was the first to introduce the Italian sonnets into English as mere translated versions of Italian sonnets. So far, English sonnet had a form very similar to the Italian sonnet. Now, later on, English sonnet was developed and reconstructed, restructured at the hands of many English Elizabethan poets like Henry Howard, Edmund Spenser, and William Shakespeare. Still, some poets preferred the Italian form of sonnet. Right. Now, here are the types of sonnets. Kindly make a note of it, because now the coming poems which we're going to read in this unit are sonnets. Okay. So here we have Petrarchan, Spenserian, and Shakespearean. So the poets, the most of the forms which we have it, when we read it, we just come across Spenserian and Shakespearean, right? And the Petrarchan consists of octave and a sestet, rhyming, ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE. Now, if you look at this, it's like octave, 8 lines, and sestet, 6 lines for Petrarchan. Okay, then you come to Spenserian. They're clearly marked as, AB, AB, BC, BC, CD, CD. I think that is missing there. And double E, that's the couplet, which I already mentioned it in my earlier session, right? So now if you just, okay, now coming to this Shakespearean, you have AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and GG. So here, I think there's one which is missing here. CD, CD, okay. Right. Right. Now, if you have noticed the difference between a Spenserian and a Shakespearean sonnet. Now here, if you look at the rhyming pattern of these 3 quatrains, they are intertwined, interlinked. Now look at this AB, AB of the Spenserian continues with BC, BC. That is, the B rhyme pattern of the word is repeated in the second quatrain. Whereas Shakespearean, if you look at it, AB, AB is the first quatrain. I hope you know how to look at this rhyming pattern. Yeah, the end words rhyme in a poem. Do you know that? Yeah? Yeah? So if you can, for an example, I can tell you page 4 of your textbook, which talks about sonnet 116. Yeah? If you can just look into it, the words which rhyme are, the first quatrain I'm reading, minds, love, finds, remove. Okay, minds and finds, love and remove. So it's A, B, A, B. Now the next stanza, if you look at it, it's mark, shaken, bark, taken. So if you look at this first quatrain, it is completely different. Second quatrain, again, there's something different. It starts like A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. Okay, it's different. So in Shakespearean sonnet, the quatrains do not, they don't kind of link to each other in the last line. Whereas in Spenserian, the last line of the first quatrain is always, kind of rhymes with the first line of the next quatrain. That's the difference between a Spenserian and a Shakespearean quatrain. Right. Rushda, I didn't get you better. What do you mean by that? Ma'am, please explain it. What do you want me to explain? I didn't get you.
Ma'am, that one, ma'am, AB, BC, BC.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Page 4. Are you in page 4?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. There's a poem there. Can you see Sonnet 116?
Yes, ma'am.
Of your textbook. Now see,
Yes.
the last words, you just mind only the last word. Okay. Just look into the last word of that first sentence. Mind. Minds are there? Minds?
Mind.
Yeah?
Mind. Yes,
Minds.
mind.
You can put it as A. A as in letter A. Okay. Then love, which is not rhyming with minds. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
So you put it as B. Okay. Now come to the third word. Third word, just below the love word, you find finds.
Fine. Yeah, it's
Finds.
matching in
Now
mind.
that is matching with minds. Did you notice
Mind.
that? Finds and minds are same. So which letter will you put for finds?
A, ma'am.
A, very good. Then come back to remove. It goes with love. I mean, not exactly, but still it does rhyme with love, isn't it? Remove, love.
Remove love.
Love.
OV.
Yeah, yeah. Remove, love. Were, the last. Okay. So you will put it as which letter for remove?
B, ma'am.
B. Now, did you notice A, B, A, B? The rhyming pattern there?
B, A, B. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Now go to the next, this thing. Okay. Now you have mark, shaken. Mark, does it match with any of the above words there, ma, in the first stanza?
No, ma'am.
Mark. It doesn't. So shall we put it as C? Another different letter now? A, B, we
Okay.
are done. We'll put it as C. Then there is shaken
Okay.
here. Shaken. It
Okay.
is also totally different. So we'll put it as D.
D. Okay.
Yeah. Now bark and mark, do they match?
Mark, bark.
Bark. They go no?
Yes.
So mark
Yes.
is C. So bark will be
C.
C. Very good.
Okay.
Now shaken, we have put it as D. Isn't it? You remember? Now
Yes, ma'am.
shaken is going with taken.
Shaken, shaken.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll put it as D. D. Okay. Yeah. Now you see C, D, C, D. It has come C, D, C, D. A, B, A, B. C, D, C, D.
C, D, C, D.
Then next is completely different again. Same way. E, F, E, F. The last one will be G, G. G, G, why? Because both of them are going with it. Okay. But this is Shakespearean sonnet. When it comes to Spenserian, the fourth word in this poem, for example, I'm giving you in a Spenserian sonnet, what is the fourth word there in this poem? Just for example, I'm giving you. Remove. No? The fourth line word. Remove is there, no? That will match with the fifth line. That will match with the fifth line in a Spenserian sonnet.
Fifth line, which one, ma'am?
No, not here, not in this poem. But usually in a Spenserian poem, what happens is, instead of after A, B, A, B, we are going with C, D, C, D, isn't it?
Okay. Yes,
so, in Spenserian, it will be A, B, A, B. Again, there will be B, C, B, C. B will be repeated again in the next quatrain. B, C, B, C. Why will it be repeated? Because that will match actually. The last line of the first quatrain word, okay, will match with the...
What is the meaning of Spenserian?
Spenserian is, Edmund Spenser is the man who had he had brought out this form of poetry. So the name is given as Spenserian poet. Spenserian poem. Shakespearean because
Shakespearean.
He has brought out. So this is the basic difference between these two people's form. Spenserian is nothing but name of that poet. Shakespearean is nothing but name of the poet. Petrarchan sonnet is nothing but name of that man who had actually started in Italy.
Okay, okay, ma'am. All right.
Okay. So from
Okay.
there, I already told you, see, in the previous, Thomas White, Sir Thomas White, he is an Englishman. He had brought this Italian sonnet to English. Okay, he introduced it into English. It was actually brought by Petrarchan. He brought it out, but Thomas White, from there, from the Italy thing, he brought it into English. He is the man who had actually initiated this sonnet. After which, people did not follow the same old sonnet. They started changing it, though keeping the lines as 14. Instead of making it 8 and 6, they brought it out as 4, 4, 4, and 2. Okay, quatrain, 3 quatrains and 1 couplet. And they changed it according to their convenience. Like, for example, Spenserian, Shakespearean. These are the people who have brought it. And yeah, so you will also sometimes, tell me.
Couplet means, ma'am, in this one, rhyming words.
Yeah, couplet is, yes, EE. That's why there is a sentence called EE or GG, because the two words of these two sentences always match. Now, for example, the same page 4 in that sonnet 116, if you look at it, the last 2 lines are couplets. They're called as couplets. Okay. Now, if this be error and upon me proved, loved, they're called couplets. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Right. And basically what happens is, in the first quatrain, the problem is introduced. Second quatrain, they try to argue about that problem. Third quatrain, they will try to, compromise. They try to agree with it. And in the last couplet, they resolve it. They are okay with it. Whatever the problem has come up, they're okay with it. I mean, they'll try to specify it. Yeah. Got it? Right. Next, let us move on to the next Elizabethan poetry characteristics over here. Okay. Now, Henry Howard invented a new poetic form known as blank verse, which is different. Now, look at this slide. I'm only giving you the features of Elizabethan poetry. Okay. The poetry which evolved during the Elizabethan period. And then you have other kinds of forms of poetry dominated during the Elizabethan age, such as metaphysical poetry. Now we will be reading this metaphysical in this class itself. Okay. Then we have parody, blank verse, dramatic poetry, and pastoral poetry. Of course, we will not deal with all this. We'll just come across with the sonnet and metaphysical poetry. Okay. Then moving on to the metaphysical poetry, what does it mean? We'll tell you in the next slide. Okay. Right. Now, here are some of the themes of Elizabethan period poems. Like, you have courtly love, mutability of life, religion and piety, rebirth and regeneration, and so on and so forth. And the famous poets, which is given here on the right-hand side of the slide, it's Thomas White. And then you have Henry Howard, Edmund Spenser. You've heard about the Spenserian, isn't it, just now? Yeah. He is the poet who had brought out the Spenserian sonnet, Edmund Spenser. Then Sir Philip Sidney, Christopher Marlowe, Sir Walter Raleigh, William Shakespeare, John Donne, John Milton. Right. Okay. Now let us just quickly look into the biography of Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and performer. He is often regarded as the best dramatist and author of English literature in history. He is commonly called the Bard of Avon and England's national poet. Then he started writing for the theater on the stage in the late 1580s. And his earliest work as a dramatist was the 3 parts of Henry VI, written from 1590 to 91. He wrote several plays and poems. I think you're also familiar with his dramas, most of his plays, right? And I think some of the movies also, his plays were adapted to movies also, if you remember, okay? And then, right. Now, his 14-line poems were collected in the sonnets, which were printed in 1609. And Shakespeare's plays were first collected in 1623 and a folio edition was published further. And a sonnet is a poem of 14 lines expressing a single emotion. Although there are different narratives on Shakespeare's sonnets, discussion usually centers around 154 sonnets that were published in quarto in 1609. So these are the sonnets published by Shakespeare. These are the poems, 154. Okay. Now the sonnet which we are reading is, what's the number of the sonnet? It is 116. Okay. But it also has got a title to it. It is also known by the number of the sonnet. Also, it also has a title to it. Okay. Right. So what is the title of sonnet 116? It is Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds. Kanis Fatima, can you please mute your mic, beta? Kanis. Yeah. Thank you. So sonnet 16, let me give you the 116. The title will be Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds. He wrote this sonnet, which is addressed to an anonymous young acquaintance of the author by the name of Mr. W.H. 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet make up this sonnet's ideal Shakespearean structure. That is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and G, G make up its rhyming pattern. Right. Now, it was most likely written in 1590, where it was quite, craziest thing for sonnets in English literature. And, his sonnets were not very popular during his lifetime. Now, this sonnet 116 has gone on to become one of the most universally beloved and celebrated poems in the English language. In magnificent moving terms, the poem describes true love as an enduring, unbending commitment between people, a bond so powerful that only death can reshape it. Though the poem is moving and romantic, it risks at times falling into hyperbole or cliche. Some readers may doubt the plausibility or the sincerity of its depiction of love. Here, Shakespeare outlines the wonderful characteristics of real love in the sonnet. The poet has eloquently articulated true love. The poet asserts his belief in the strength of pure love by asserting that there cannot be any barriers to the union of sincere lovers. True love never changes, okay? So even when there is a prospect of change, it never does. So this whole sonnet talks about love. Now, it doesn't yield to the might of its destroyer. I mean, it will not get destroyed at any cost. To put it another way, the poet claims it has an unmatched level of consistency and steadfastness. True love never gives in to anyone's demands. The goal of the sonnet is to highlight the qualities of real love. According to him, real love is the kind that makes people happy and successful. So it is a really valuable and enduring emotion. It must be enduring, ageless, and self-sufficient. So one ought to continue to experience this kind of love in his life. Right. So here he talks about the nature of ideal love, how it has to be. Okay. And in the course of this definition, an ordered notion of ideal love, love's constancy is set against a sense of love's problems of flux and change. He also says that true love is not subject to time. I mean, it has no yesterday, no today, no tomorrow. Okay. It has, it's not bound to any sort of time. It doesn't change gets influenced by time. And the characteristic feature of true love is that it endures even when the partner is inconsistent or absent. Absent here, it means that maybe the other partner must have passed away or whatever. Even in the absence of the other partner, still the love remains the same. Right. Then moving on to the next poem, written by uh, The Seven Ages of Man. Okay. Now, this is not exactly a poem. In fact, it's an extract taken from Shakespeare's famous play, As You Like It. Okay. The poet compares this world to a stage of theater and all its men and women to actors and actresses. They take birth, play seven different roles, and die. Now, these seven stages, that's what it says, the title of this writing over here. It's actually a speech, the seven ages of man. Now, here, these seven stages of man's life are that of an infant, schoolboy, lover, soldier, justice, old pantaloon, and second childishness. After playing these seven roles and living through these stages of life, man departs from this world. It ends the strange and eventful history of his life. Now, let me just give you uh, this is in fact a kind of a monologue. So the speech, he tries to examine the changes that take place over the course of a man's life. As I told you, I'll just give you a little more into it. Baby or infant, schoolboy or child, lover, soldier, and instead of justice, you can even take it as a judge, old man, and extreme old age. Now, each of these stages represented in a panel of the it was in fact stained glass windows. It was represented in a panel of the stained glass windows. And in fact, this idea of the seven ages of man is quite old and dates to the 12th century. And it might have been probably taken it from there, the concept of this, of seven uh, ages of man by Shakespeare. Now, in fact, it's also called All the World's a Stage. And this is actually a line from the comedy As You Like It. Now, this is actually the conversation takes place in scene 7 of Act 2 in the Arden Forest between Duke Senior and Orlando and the brilliant philosopher Jacques. So here he gives a kind of an explanation about the seven ages of man. But you know something? Shakespeare's time saw a lot of discussion about the ages of man. You know, this passage wasn't quite as well known as it is now. Now, four ages of man were suggested by Aristotle, and the concept was persisted ever since. But Shakespeare divides life into seven eras, which is a new one compared to prior writers and philosophers who often divided life into three or four ages. Now, for another point I would like to add here, the Nyaya system, especially in Ashrama Dharma, which is divided a man's life into four eras. That is Brahmacharya Ashrama, Grihastha Ashrama, Vanaprastha Ashrama, and Sannyasa Ashrama. Also has a comparable and more well-known system of ages or phases of life. So this is what, as against to all this, he had brought out seven ages, whereas Aristotle and the later on writers have brought in four, but he has mentioned seven ages to it. Right. Right. Moving on to the next poet, that is John Milton. So, John Milton, the moment you read this poet's bio, he belongs to an age called the Puritan age, which is from 1620 to 1660. It is also known by the name of Milton as Age of Milton. It was the most important time in English history and literature. religious fervor, political instability, and a passionate desire to transform society in accordance with Puritan principles were all prevalent at this time. I hope you all have an idea about Puritan age, where people were against to any sort of, kind of entertainment like the cinemas and or the plays and the dramas. They were mostly spiritual kind of life they would lead. That was Puritan period, Puritan age. Now, the influential authors of this era captures the intellectual and societal changes of the time. With his epic masterpiece, Paradise Lost, John Milton, a towering figure of this era, revolutionized English poetry. Other eminent authors who made substantial contributions include Andrew Marvell and John Bunyan, authors of The Pilgrim's Progress and metaphysical poetry. Now, the deeply philosophical and theological issues are explored in Milton's works, including the nature of good and evil, the fall of humanity, and the difficulties of free will. Readers are captivated by his command of the English language, his complicated rhyme and vivid imagery, and his writing is influenced by his ardent political and religious convictions. John Milton's contribution to literature are still studied and respected, solidifying his place as a Puritan age literary legend. Okay, let us quickly look into the characteristics of Milton poetry. Now, if you look at the poem, here you have the poem which is prescribed in the book, in our syllabus, is on his blindness. Okay, so let us look into the features of this, like of his poetry in general. So, after Shakespeare, Milton is the greatest English poet. In him, we have a wonderful union of intellectual power and creative power. He is the most sublime of English poets. In grand style, majesty of thought and diction, he is unrivaled. His descriptive power is excellent. In the opening books of Paradise Lost, the debate in the Council of the Fallen Angels shows Milton's extraordinary insight into motive and character. There is an intensity of individuality throughout the poem. In the technical side of his poetry, his great beauty of style and versification are noteworthy. Milton remains our greatest master. Now, uh, before, I mean, he had actually gone blind after some point of time. Now, when he wrote this poem, I think it was partially blind, and he, with the help of his daughter, had to finish most of his works. So, Milton went blind due to complications from glaucoma in a time before Braille and other technologies to facilitate. Yeah, dear, I'll get back to you, Ma. I'll just get back to you. Sadia, I'll just get back to you. So, in a time before Braille and other technologies to facilitate sightless reading, Milton's blindness could have been a career ending impairment. In On his blindness, Milton expresses his anxiety that without his sight, he will no longer be able to exercise his one talent as a writer and poet. Without his poetry and prose, he cannot serve God. Over the course of the poem, Milton comes to realize that God doesn't need his talent, only his faith and love. Right. So the sonnet begins with deep pessimism. The poet became blind when he had hardly completed half span of his life. The whole world appeared dark. and gloomy to the poet. And his poetic talent, which was the gift of the god, seemed useless to him because he could not compose poetry in the absence of his eyesight. The poet is desirous of giving full account of his genius, but he is helpless. The poet suffers dejection in his soul as the Almighty God has rendered him blind. The poet asks whether God requires full work from a man who has been deprived of his eyesight, but immediately he hears the inner voice of patience. Patience consoles the poet, saying, God does not require the return of his gifts. His heart is kind and merciful. And God does not depend upon the man's services. Thousands of angels are at his command, and they always carry out his order over land and ocean. The people who bear their sufferings and responsibilities are also God's good servants. Prayer in silence, complete resignation, and dedication and submission to the will of God without any complaint indicate the true and real service of God. This, this is what he means in this. Okay. So, yeah. Sadia, right. So versification is nothing but writing it in the form of a verse. Verse is nothing but poetic, lyrical kind of a format. That is called versification. Yeah?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, ma. Next. Now we move on to John Donne, Andrew Marvell. Now, one more point I want to add here about on his blindness. Um, it was actually published, it got published without a title. It was, in fact, the first references by Milton to his blindness. And he did have this problem because he had strained his eyes by reading late into the night. And though blindness, the doctors had asked him to avoid hard study. Now, this actually made his life very difficult and hard. It pained him as he felt that he had done nothing great in the field of poetry till then. So, this present poem, the sonnet, refers to his spiritual crisis of the poet. And its theme appears to be his blindness. Now, but as we go deep into it, we find that his blindness is only the starting point. The sonnet ends in deep religious note. It affirms Milton's firm belief in the justice of God. It also seeks to justify God's ways to man, though the poet later devoted an epic to this purpose. Right. Right. Next, we are going into the second unit, John Donne and Andrew Marvell. Now, the moment you look at this poet, John Donne, I think we've moved towards 18th century, somewhere towards the Enlightenment age. From Elizabethan, we have come to the, yeah, the next unit that is towards 18th century. And so in the previous unit, we have looked into the salient features of Elizabethan and Puritan ages. And we have also noticed that Elizabethan age is known for peace and prosperity, which it offered to its citizens. And also we remember that's an important era of Renaissance that inspired national pride through classical ideals, economic prosperity, and optimism amongst the people. And Shakespeare and John Milton, they laid solid foundations for the mainstream of English poetry to flourish during the later years. Right. So now that's the reason why I'm trying to mention that we are moving into the next unit, which is somewhat, towards the 18th century, right? Right. So first and foremost, the important point we would like to, you know, notice here in this period is the metaphysical poetry. This is one aspect which talks about a lot about John Donne. He's famous for using this kind of a poetry, this form of kind of thing in his poetry. Okay, so what is metaphysical poetry? Metaphysics, we all know it's a branch of philosophy which concerned with explaining the natural world. It's a study of being and reality. It asks fundamental questions such as, is there a god? What is man's place in the universe? And this also includes questions of space, time, causality, existence, and possibility. Okay. Now, metaphysical poetry was written in 17th century by British poets. Now, these poets did not term themselves metaphysical poets. The name came much later as Samuel Johnson attempted to classify the type of poetry that came from this period. So, this period onwards, you get to notice this form of poetry called the metaphysical poetry. And the poets who have come up with this form of poetry is John Donne, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, and Andrew Marvell. I think John Donne and Andrew Marvell's poems we are going to read, and they are of the metaphysical poetry. So as we know, it's a poetry which is concerned with the whole experience of man, but the intelligence, learning, and seriousness of the poets means that the poetry is about the profound areas of experience, especially about love, romantic and sensual, about man's relationship with God, the eternal perspective, and to a less extent about pleasure, learning, and art. And these are some of the characteristics. When you read a metaphysical poem, the word itself tells you metaphysical poetry, where meta is beyond our physical thing, something you bring it into your poetry. So that is metaphysical. For example, John Donne mostly tries to compare and kind of an unusual thing as sun. He kind of shides him. He kind of he's upset with sun for disturbing him, when he's actually with his lady love. And such kind of unusual things you get to see in such kind of a poem. So that is called metaphysical. And they are brief but intense meditations characterized by striking use of wit, irony, and wordplay. And so here is the poet who's quite known for this work of metaphysical poetry. Okay. And let us quickly look into his biography. He's a poet, scholar, soldier, and secretary. John Donne was born into a recusant family and died on March 31st, 1631. He joined the Church of England as a cleric and was appointed as Dean of London, St. Paul's Cathedral, with the support of the monarch. He is regarded as the foremost exponent of the poets who write about metaphysics. In addition to sonnets, love poems, religious poetry, Latin translations, epigrams, elegies, songs, and satires, his poetical works are renowned for their figurative and sensual style. So he was actually born in London at the time when Roman Catholicism was being practiced. Practicing Roman Catholicism was forbidden in England. So he was born during that period of time. And he was born to a family of agnostics in a family of 6 kids. He was the third child. So here there's again a simpler meaning to this. So literally meta means beyond and physics means physical nature. And Dryden has first used this word metaphysical in connection with Donne's poetry and wrote, Donne affects the metaphysics, and Dr. Johnson confirmed the judgment of Dryden. Ever since, the word metaphysical has been used for Donne and his followers. This type of poetry is witty, ingenious, and highly philosophical. Right. I think this point we've already touched upon. Well, if you look into the characteristic features of Donne's metaphysical poetry, it is quite complex and difficult. Most varied concepts are brought together. It is intellectual in tone. There's a fusion of emotion and intellect as there is intellectual analysis of emotions. It is full of conceits which are learned, intellectual, and over elaborated. It is argumentative, and originality is archived by the use of a new vocabulary drawn from the world of trade and commerce, the art and the science. In order to arrest attention of tone, a poem begins abruptly and colloquially, and unusual rhythms are used. Unusual compound words are also used for the same purpose. And it is often dramatic in form. Here it goes. Death Be Not Proud by John Donne. See, this is again the unusual thing. You know, he is kind of addressing it to death. Death is a metaphor here. He says, hey, you don't be. I mean, it's been personified, right? Death Be Not Proud. So he presents an argument in this poem against the power of death. Addressing death as a person, the speaker warns death against pride in his power. Such power is merely an illusion. He says, don't be so proud. Death, you're not so strong. And the end, death thinks it brings to men and women is in fact a rest from world weariness for its alleged victims. The poet criticizes death as a slave to other forces, fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. Death is not in control for a variety of other powers exercise their violation in taking lives. Even in the rest it brings, death is inferior to drags. Finally, the speaker predicts the end of death itself, stating, death thou shalt die. So he says, don't be proud, even die someday. So you are not that very strong where you have control over people. Okay, right. So this is in fact referred to as Holy Sonnet 10. And written by John Donne in 1609, published in 1633. It's a direct address to death, arguing that it is powerless because it acts merely as a short sleep between earthly living and the eternal afterlife. In essence, death is nothing to fear. So the sonnet is written mostly in iambic pentameter and is part of a series known as Donne's Holy Sonnets. And in keeping with these other poems, Holy Sonnet 10 is a devotional lyric that looks at life's biggest questions in the context of Donne's religious beliefs. Now, this poem is addressed to a personified death. The speaker admonishes death, saying, be not proud. Some people think death is powerful and to be feared, but in reality, it is neither of those things. Furthermore, rest and sleep have the appearance of death, but are pleasurable. How much more pleasure than would come from death? Great men go with death and attain rest and the deliverance of their souls. So death serves the interest of fate, bad luck, powerful rulers, and desperate men, and makes its home with war, poison, and grave illness. The speaker questions why death is so proud when the sleep he causes is just a short sleep after which someone wakes to eternal life. And when that happens, death itself will die and no longer exist. Right. Then we have another poem, The Canonization. Here, the poem which is prescribed in your syllabus. So it's quite witty, pun, passionate, and was first published in Posthumous 1633 collection poems. Posthumous is after his death, it was, acknowledged, and most of the times it would happen. These kind of poems and, may it be some literary piece of work. And when, the writers were alive, when the authors were alive, they would not be acknowledged for it. Only after their death, then they would realize that would have been some kind of a masterpiece, and then they would, recognize. So, or sometimes they would get published after their death. Then it is called posthumous. So the poem's speaker, a middle-aged man who has fallen deeply in love, tells a mocking friend to leave him alone and let him love. Love, this poem suggests, is timeless in more than one way. It can strike at any age and it can help lovers to attain saint like immortality. So, in fact, it's a 5 stanza poem, sets of 9 lines. Now, look at the rhyming pattern over here. It has 9 lines, rhyme it in this manner: A, B, B, A, C, 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 A, double A, sorry. So, there are 5 stanzas, and each stanza has 9 lines with this kind of a, and right. So basically, what is the meaning of this word canonization? So the word canonization, it means the act of process of changing an ordinary religious person into a saint in Catholic Christian religion. Now, this title suggests that the poet and his beloved will become saints of love. See, this is a metaphysical poem. And in the future, and they will be regarded as saints of true love in the whole world in the future. And this poem actually deploys conceits. What are conceits? They are extended metaphors. Okay, you see a lot of metaphors, extended metaphors and allusions from medieval philosophy of metaphysics. And now the speaker tells about the transformation of worldly lovers into holy saints, as in the Catholic custom of canonization. Now, he also asserts that he and his beloved will be canonized when he immortalizes their mutual love for each other, and that future lovers will invoke them to gain the strength of spiritual love. Now, the poem here he assumes a dramatic form when the speaker starts replying angrily to a third person whom seems to have objected to this love affair, especially so because the speaker seems to be an old man. Then he says, he tries to justify his metaphysical aspect or interpretation of love. He says, the love has no age. Now it is, in fact, the style of the poem is conversational, and it is mainly written in iambic pentameter. Right. So here we come up with Andrew Marvell. Uh, he has written on Mr. Milton's Paradise Lost. Okay, Mr. Milton's Paradise Lost by Andrew Marvell. Right. So Andrew Marvell, he was in fact a close friend of Milton's and his associate in the office of Latin Secretary in Cromwell's protectorate. Marvell's poem was the first important criticism of Paradise Lost, published along with a Latin tribute by Samuel Barrow in the second edition of the epic. It's interesting to note how Marvell characterizes his early doubts about Milton's project and just what he later comes to value in Milton's achievement. Andrew Marvell's poem. Sadia, can you please mute your mic, ma? Yeah. Andrew Marvell's poem on Mr. Milton's Paradise Lost is a tribute, in fact, to John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost. In this poem, Marvell admires and celebrates Milton's artistic genius and his religious and moral themes and his depiction of Satan and Adam and Eve. Milton, we know he belongs to the Puritan age. Okay, so he has written Paradise Lost and he admires, Andrew marvels, and he has written this poem called Mr. Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, this poem consists of 13 stanzas of rhymed couplets, and each stanza consists of 2 lines, with each line having 10 syllables. And the poem begins with a praise of Milton's work and his abilities as a poet. Then he discusses Milton's choice of subject matter, the fall of man, the Satan's rebellion against God. He praises Milton for his religious and moral themes and his ability to invoke emotions in his readers. Finally, Marvel concludes the poem by asserting that Milton has done justice to his chosen theme and that his work will be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. So, religious and moral themes are central to both Milton's Paradise Lost and Marvel's On Mr. Milton's Paradise Lost. Okay, I think I'll stop the session here and continue with Alexander Pope in the next session. Okay, and then we will move on to the second block. I think the last part is Alexander Pope. I will continue it tomorrow. And also with the second block. Along with this, I will move on to the second block. The second block has again 3 units, 4, 5, and 6. So along with this, I will continue with the second block. Okay. I hope you all understood the first block, right? So, but when I'm giving you the summaries, you also have to read the poems on your own. So first read the summary, then you will, at least while reading the poem, you'll be able to understand and you'll be able to comprehend it. Like you will try to get your own perspective about the poem, your point of view about the poem. Right. Yes, dear. The words of the meanings of the words are given in your textbook. Haven't you noticed it? There it says, wait, I'll tell you. See, every poem has glossary. Glossary is nothing but the meanings of the words. Which are the meanings you want, Ma? You please tell me. Yeah. So what you do is, whatever the words and the meanings are given, you try to write it. Yeah, yeah. Some more it has to be. So what you do, just make a note of those words. You pass it on to me. You text it in the group or maybe in the chat box in the next class. I will try to. Or you can even Google search those words, dear. Right? But most of the words are covered up here in your glossary, in these notes of your textbook. I'm sure that would suffice. Yeah. But still, if